Greetings, everyone. It has been a while since I did a video recording, and I wanted to bring one to you today as it relates to some of the audio recordings that we've done recently about Zikr. Zikr means remembrance, bringing to mind, and it specifically refers to bringing the divine, bringing God, bringing Spirit to mind by saying usually by saying God's name, or it is similar in many ways to Buddhist meditation, East Indian meditation. It is not unlike the contemplation or meditation of the Jewish people or the Christian people. So it is quieting the mind and sort of focusing on spiritual nature. And so what I wanted to do was ground some of the conversations we've had recently in some authentic texts that were written by, in this case today, members of the Naqshbandi order, who were once upon a time very numerous in the north of Afghanistan and certainly in Uzbekistan and Bukhara. And specifically, I plan to quote from a work by Muhammad Parsa, which is called Khutsiya. And Khutsiya means the sacredness, and here he means the sacred words or the holy words of Bahauddin Naqshband. So this is going to be a bilingual presentation, and I'm going to start in Persian. So he says, or the introducer says, Dar Kitab Khutsiya, Khwaja Muhammad Parsa Sukhan Bahauddin Naqshband ra آوردند و نقل کردند فاذکرونی اذکرکم ذکر حق سبحانه و تعالی توفیق یاد کردن است بر آن مراتبی که ذکر راست و هرچه دیده شد و دانسته شد همه غیر است و حجاب. So he begins, and it's introduced as the book, the Khutsiya, which is written by Khwaja Muhammad Parsa, which has to do with the sacred phrases or sacred words of Bahauddin Naqshband. And these are what are brought into the book. And the first citation in this section is an ayah from the Holy Quran, which is Fazkuruni Azkurkum, which could be translated as remember me and I remember you. A very interesting, powerful notion, if you think about it. If I remember Spirit, if I remember God, and I focus that remembrance in this verse, in this ayah, God says that He will remember me. And so this is one of the most powerful two words or two expressions in the Quran, because it shows this reciprocal relationship originated by God that allows an access to intimacy for the human being into the spiritual and divine realm. So, Fazkuruni Azkurkum, he says this is the remembrance of the Haqq, meaning of true reality, of God as true reality. May he be glorified and sanctified. He is very high and sacred. This is the successful and rightful form of remembering God and Spirit that is up to this level that could be described as proper form and proper expression of such a remembrance, such a zikr. And in it, anything that is seen during the time of zikr, the time put aside, for example, in the Western world in meditation or in prayer. Here he's this, we could say this is along similar lines, but one is generally seated, one has done an ablution, one has put aside time and gone into a quiet place, hopefully, where to sit and to focus one's attention and one's mind on the presence of God. So he says that's the level that is the true zikr. And as I was continuing, he said, and anything that in that space, that special time and place of meditation and remembrance, anything that is seen and anything that is known or understood, all of these are actually otherness, meaning they are other than the pure divine reality, which is devoid of these things. And it is a veil, therefore, a veil of true reality. And it is through the force and the reality of the word la. La means no. So it's a negation. So in other words, it is through the word of negation that those things, those mental occurrences, thoughts, and so forth, they are negated, and they must be negated in this manner. Back to the Persian. و نفی خواطر که شرط اعظم سلوک است به تصرف عدم در وجود سالک که آن تصرف عدم اثر و نتیجه جذبه الهی است به کمال میسر نگردد. So he's saying here, and the negation of these mental occurrences of thought, imagination, vision, etc. The negation, which is a condition, one of the great conditions of spiritual travel, it cannot arrive to its proper result without the influence of Adam, non-being, without the influence of non-being in the existence of the seeker. And this influence of non-being is the effect and the result of the divine attraction, jazba ilahi. So to continue in Persian, he says, wa wuquf qalbi برای آن است که تا اثر آن جذبه مطالعه کرده شود و آن اثر در دل قرار گیرد. So he says, and وقوف قلبی, he's using the name of one of the 11 principles of the Naqshbandi way. And in fact, This is the 11th principle, the final principle that was added by Bahauddin Naqshband. And Wuquf Qalbi, it means the awareness of the heart, the great, beautiful presence that one has with awareness in one's heart of God. So he says, this principle of the awareness of the heart, the principle exists so that one can understand that the effect of the divine attraction, it can be contemplated within oneself, it can be witnessed, it can be known, and that effect should take root, it should settle, and it should become a property of one's heart, is essentially what he's saying here. So these are very, perhaps a bit complicated, these words, but one should understand, to summarize in simplicity, that he is saying that there's a beautiful Quranic verse, beautiful ayah. Fazkuruni wazkurkum. Remember me, God says, and I, in this same moment, am remembering you. Or remember me and I remember you. However you want to think about the simplicity of that expression. And he said this is the truest form of zikr. Why? Because people should not imagine that they are the ones who are successfully arriving in God's presence. One only arrives in the divine presence because God reaches to us. But a condition of purification, you might say, is that we reach towards God. So God is always there, but when we actually turn to him at that precise moment, whenever it is, he will turn to us. And he goes on to say that anything else that occurs during our sitting, meaning during the time that we are doing meditation or zikr, we should regard it as other than the pristine, empty nature of true reality, the source of all things, which is none of those things and all of those things. So he reminds us that we should let go of anything that comes into our mind, and he mentions the sacred word in Quran, which is La. And you may, those of you from the East Indian world, from India, you may recall that this is not unlike the practice of neti, 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 which is no, not this, not this, not this, meaning whatever you can think of, whatever you can imagine, just say this is not it. It would be beyond something that I could conceptualize, something that I could imagine. It would be beyond this. So la, no, is the word of negation, and he says, and it is through this word, the application, or this idea, this principle of negation, that we sit pleasantly, not in a hostile manner towards our own mind and its thoughts, but in a pleasant and relaxed way. But as things arise, we simply let them go. And furthermore, he says that this is a very great condition for advancing on the path. And this cannot happen without the influence, he says, of non-being within the seeker. Non-being here should not be taken in a negative way. It really means the source, the true home of the source of all things, also known in the West, therefore, as the fertile void. So the influence of that within the seeker, it occurs through the influence of the divine attraction, the Jazba Ilahi. So God, of course, wishes to attract his servants to himself. He says, I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known. And I created the world and humankind so that I would be known. But at a more profound level, he says, I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known, meaning to truly be known, to be experienced. So this is the level of spirituality of Sufism. And so he says, without this influence, this spiritual attraction, this divine attraction of God, then it is not possible to arrive at this high level, this attainment to this spiritual condition that is being described here. And he says that therefore the principle of the remembrance of the heart, wuquf qalbi, which, as I said earlier, is the 11th principle of the Naqshbandi way. He says this is so that one can learn to contemplate, one can learn to experience, to see, to know the influence of this divine attraction, and that quality, that sign would remain established in the heart, in the spiritual heart. So, because the text requires some explanation, it is not surprising that some of the great Sufis have added their own little notes to this. And one of the great Sufis of Afghanistan was Abdurrahman Jami, who was in Herat, and he was reading this text, and in the margin of the book, this section, he wrote some notes. So in Persian, that Hawashi Khutsiya, Abdurrahman Jami نوشتند یعنی آنچه شنید گوش و آنچه دید بصر در عالم ملک و آنچه بصیرت دیده در عالم ملکوت همه حجاب است، از همه باید گذشت از بحر مقصود. So the first thing he says writes in the margin, he says, in other words, referring to the earlier text, he says, anything that can be heard by the ear, anything or anything that is seen by the eyes in the outside world and or imagined and seen in the world of forms and imagination. All of these, they are veils, and one must let them go. One must escape from them for the sake of the objective, which is, of course, to know God. Back to the Persian, he says, Adam ibarat ast az muqaddimah fana ke asari جذب است که ظهور است از خصوصیات آشیا نه از اصل آشیا و ملک این به فنا حاصل است. تکرار میکنمش که عدم عبارت است از مقدمه فنا که اثر جذبه است که ظهور است از خصوصیات آشیا نه از اصل آشیا و ملک این به فنا حاصل است. So now he brings a slightly more complicated sentence to the fore, and he says non-being is an expression that refers to the introduction to, the beginning of, the entrance to fana, meaning annihilation. Fana just really means the ecstatic self, beyond self-knowing in the usual sense, and the ego self having been sublimated and temporarily extinguished. Okay, so he says, and this beginnings of such extinction, this is the effect of jazba, of the divine attraction, which is a this process, meaning is a forgetting of or becoming unconscious of the particularities of things, but not of the origin of things. And the domain of this, the possession of this, you might say, for the seeker, or the arrival at this, the attainment of this, is obtained, is arrived at through this selflessness, through this annihilation of the ego self. Not the annihilation of one's true self, but the annihilation of who one thinks one is. And then lastly here, in the margin, he says in Persian, Yani Zikr Allah na آن است که با زبان یا با خیال الا گویند، بلکه حقیقت ذکر آن بود که باطن از اندیشه غیر پاک آید و به حق آگاه گردد. تکرار میکنم، یعنی ذکر الله نه آن است که با زبان یا با خیال الا گوید، بل حقیقت ذکر آن بود که باطن از اندیشه غیر پاک آید و به حق آگاه گردد. So he says, lastly, Abdurrahman Jami in the margin says, in other words, the remembrance of Allah, the zikr of Allah, this is not that which is found in the tongue's repetition of God's name, or in the imagination of God's name, the saying of God's name. Actually, on the contrary, the true reality of the zikr is such that the interior of the human being, meaning the spiritual aspect of the human being, becomes completely free and cleansed of thoughts and conceptualization of things that are other than reality, and in their place becomes truly aware of the presence of the haq, meaning the presence of the divine reality. So there you have a somewhat brief, but I hope a helpful text for you to think about as you go into the meditation or the zikr